I recently finished this narrative game called Spiritfarer, and I gotta say, I think this is the best character writing I've ever seen in a game. And I play a lot of story-driven games. So when I finished it, I had to ask myself, why? How are those characters so lovable? What did the writers do so right? And here's some of my conclusions, and also a world building / character building exercise based on those conclusions. One that you can follow even if you've never heard about this game. Spiritfarer is a game about death, but in a cute, emotional way. You play as Stella, a girl tasked with taking the wandering spirits from this world to the next. The thing is, when the spirits get to you, they're not exactly ready to go. They have some business to attend to, some relationships to process, some thinking to do. And part of your job is to help them with their emotional journeys. There's a lot of good game design here, but since this is a channel about writing, I'm gonna focus on the textual aspects of the game, okay? Okay. All the characters in Spiritfarer have this sort of a animal anthropomorphic appearance, and they clearly occupy some sort of a personality archetype. This frog is really cheerful and goofy and family oriented. This bird is a posh hipster who really cares and has a passion for art and legacy. This snake is a mantra humming vegan hippie who really cares about her connection to the land. And they, of course, match this colorful universe that Stella occupies. So it hits you really hard when they reveal who they really are and why they haven't found peace yet. And it's not as if they are not what they first showed you. It's not as if they don't have those archetypical behaviors. They do. It's just that they're so much more than that. For the sake of example, I'm gonna give you one spoiler about one character called Summer. If you don't want the spoiler, this is absolutely fine. You just jump to this timestamp here and I'll have finished talking about it and won't mention it again. Okay? Okay, spoiler incoming. 3, 2, 1. Summer, the vegan snake I mentioned, used to be an agronomic engineer, class of 1971. And for many years she worked for big companies with maximum land production yields, using whichever transgenic seeds, monocultures, pesticides, anything that would make this land produce more money. Later in her life, she met Rose, who she'd marry eventually, and Rose taught her another way to relate to the natural world, a way that made her happy at last. So she sold everything she owned, bought a small plot of land with her beloved, and started using biodynamic farming, a sustainable practice attuned to the earth. But it was too late. The beginnings of cancer were already there. A fight with a dragon that would eventually tire her to death. This is the lady that teaches you that every living being has value and should be loved. The healer, the one that's constantly worrying about her spiritual balance. She tells you she's conflicted because she's having such a hard time loving that cancer growing inside of her. She feels she's failing her journey towards love at the very end. Oof. And that's just one of the characters. The game has plenty more. So here's where I think the triumph of this writing is. Those characters, they manage to be interesting both in a superficial level, but also in a deeper level. The world building really helps with the superficial bit, in which they are allowed to be those archetypes, those magical, whimsical creatures that you encounter. They have interesting appearances and interesting behaviors that are part animal, part human. But then when you get to the deeper level and the world building is somehow lifted, eliminated, you start to understand the bridges between those two sides. The surface and the deep inside, they are not in conflict. In fact, they complement each other. Of course, this is the animal that represents you because of this deeper reason here. Of course, you ended up having a tragic story because this superficial obsession of yours got out of hand. Of course, This is how you face death. I've seen you dressed, and I've seen you naked. This is how you go. So let's grab those elements and transform them into a world-building exercise. And since Spiritfarer's characters are so potent, let's focus on characters today. Okay, so let's work with both sides of this coin. First, the archetypical whimsical side, and also the too real side. And let's create connections between them. For starters, we want to give our characters 2 behavior-focused characteristics, and they have to be quite obvious. Something that Stella would find out in her first dialogue with the character, and that would be also present in almost every interaction from this point on. Second, we need an anthropomorphic animal form to represent this character, and bonus points if we can hint at the deeper level of the character without being too obvious. Third, we will give our characters a home, a building, a construction that represents this most archetypical side of them. And if we're feeling creative, we can even imagine what sort of improvements would they ask for their own homes. What do those improvements represent? Wonderful. So let's go to the other side. Now we want to give them a life journey, a real-world story that somehow informs their archetypical behavior. But it must include a pivotal point. A moment in that journey when things changed. Something that just looking at their appearance and their behavior, you couldn't tell. It's important here that those stories are not too epic. They're not superheroes, they're not kings, they're just real people who died. The issues are not fantastical, they're just really human. You could bump into that spirit on the street tomorrow. Lastly, with all this information in hand, we want to define what's the last thing this character talks about when they're taken to the Everdoor, to leave this world forever. What's their final conversation about? Oof. You can pause this video now and try the exercise yourself. The next part of this video is going to be my own take, my response to this prompt, which of course is not better or worse than anybody's, just one out of infinite possibilities for that. I wonder if we'll create something similar or something really different. Okay, let's make a spirit. Let's start with the animal, so then it's easier for you to picture it. My animal is a blue lobster, dressed in full professor attire, very stiff. His name is Yasu. His main features are mathematician and socially awkward, maybe even socially clueless. When you meet him, it is very clear that he's a math nerd. He even has some mathematical signs in the middle of his speech bubbles instead of prepositions. This is how he frames the world, formulas, probabilities. When he meets Stella, he informs her that they have a 36% chance of getting along. His home is a study room full of chalkboards with half-solved equations. When he asks Stella to build it, he's not asking for a home, he's asking for a place where he can conduct this very important theoretical research. But there's a catch there. The space starts pretty closed up with dark walls, very cramped. The first improvement that Yasu asks you is actually about light. It tells you he needs more light to conduct his research, and he tells you that there's a 78% more efficiency if they just use sunlight. So you install a big window that occupies a huge chunk of the room. The second improvement is actually to expand this window, and as the window grows, it pushes all the chalkboards to the side, and the room becomes very light. You can see the other side of the boat with the window, and at last, in the final improvement, you transform his study room into an observatory. And when you go there in the night, sometimes you can see Yasu just gazing at the stars. Foreshadowing. Okay, let's flip it to the other side again. Yasu was a prodigy child, and the pride and joy of a really strict family, because he could do things that children normally can't. He was not just any lobster. Since a very early age, before he was 10, he showed a lot of promise for mathematics. His parents were ecstatic. This is exactly what they wanted. So they make sure to turn Yasuo's life, and in a way the whole family's life, into the perfect growing environment for Yasuo's talent. So at a very young age, he was removed from his school and transferred to several different institutions, but none of them could host him in a way that his parents were satisfied. No mathematical education could withstand that level of parental ambition. So he was given private tutors, who were not really there because they cared about Yasuo, but because of the huge sums of money that Yasuo's family would invest in his education. In fact, most of the family's income would be invested in him, in detriment of his two older sisters, who resented this and treated him really coldly. For Yasuo's parents, the two girls were not geniuses, so why even bother if we do have a genius? But Yasuo never agreed with that, and it created a real distance between him and them. He could really calculate like nobody, but he was isolated. No friends, no family, no emotional life. In fact, he had such an underformed emotional structure that he didn't even know how to ask for help. Years passed and he never really got to develop any social skills. And when it was time for him to get his first job, he didn't even have an interview because all the universities were fighting for him to hire him as a researcher. At work, his capabilities were so superior and at such a different level from his peers that he was always assigned to work alone on his own projects. And this image fit. The more isolated he got, the more confused he got in any social situation, the more he fit into this stereotypical idea of the prodigy, the theoretical mathematician. Soon enough, he was also seeing himself in the same stereotypical way the world saw him. So the awkward way he found to live his life was via tangents. When he asks you for the window, he doesn't really need the light, but he needed some sort of story to connect his true desires to something related to this one particular societal expectation that has been given to him, his research. So he even needed to convince himself that it's about the light and not about the pleasure in order to ask you. In reality, Yasuo didn't want to spend his whole life thinking about abstract things. He wanted to experience. He wanted to grab at least a small percentage of everything that was denied to him. He wanted to travel the world, to run a marathon, to find love. But the only thing he was ever given was this one task: to imagine numbers, and nothing else. So at the end, he builds an observatory. He's not conducting any research there as he said he would. He's just having a blast looking at the stars. He finds it fascinating. He wants to eat the world with a big spoon. But now it's too late. When you take him to the door, he's commenting on his early childhood, how at some point he had a 70% chance of developing the social skills he needed, a 40% chance of a normal childhood, but with each decision, with each step, the numbers went down, down, down. He tells Stella that she was an unexpected variable, something that was not in the initial calculations, that she taught him a lot about communicating, about enjoying. In the end, he admits that he never really enjoyed mathematics. It was his curse. He was just really good at it. He regrets it. He wishes he could go back, have a new chance in life, start over. But he also knows this is a 0% probability. He wishes Stella a different fate. He wishes Stella to be normal. And then he goes. Whew. That's my take on this world building exercise. It's quite intense. As you noticed, I am a huge fan of this game, and I even wrote an open letter to the writers of Spiritfarer called The Joy of Complex Emotions. I originally posted on Reddit. I'll link it below if you're interested. It's just one fan talking to amazing people who did a wonderful work of art, some wholesome content. If you like this format of world building exercise, I had a blast making this video. I'm thinking about making more, but it does make a huge difference for me if people comment saying like, hey, I like this, I thought it was interesting, and I read every single comment, so please do comment. That makes my day. And this is my Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. I hope you enjoy all the other videos, and I'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao.